Every gilded cage is built with walls of comfort. The only question is what you're paying for them.
Have you ever really stopped to think about money? I don't just mean earning it or spending it, but where does it actually fundamentally come from? It's this system that's so central to our lives, it's kind of like the air we breathe. But the mechanics behind it, how currency is actually created, it often feels hidden away like this giant, invisible machine is running in the background. So let's dive in and pull back the curtain on how our money is really made.
You know, most of us probably have this image in our heads of a government printing press, churning out bills to build roads or fund schools. But is that really the whole story? Not even close. The journey to answer this question is pretty fascinating, and it's rooted in a history of crisis, secrecy, and a design that, believe me, impacts every single one of us to this day.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to start with a major crisis of confidence that set the stage. Then we'll uncover a secret meeting on a place called Jekyll Island. After that, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of something called the money multiplier effect. See how the government is funded with interest. And finally, look at what our sources call a perpetual debt machine.
All right, so our story kicks off more than 100 years ago with this massive financial firestorm that just ripped across America, the Panic of 1907. To really get why our current system even exists, you first have to understand the problem it was supposedly created to solve.
What's really wild here is the chain reaction that our sources lay out. It all supposedly starts with some targeted rumors from a super powerful figure, J.P. Morgan, which then sparks a huge public panic. Of course, that panic leads to bank runs, and the whole system starts to buckle under the pressure. But here's the key takeaway. This chaos was then framed not as something caused by a few powerful people, but as a failure of the entire system, which created the perfect excuse for a brand new one.
And this quote from Congressman Charles Lindbergh just nails it. The panic was advertised, that's his word, as a failure of the system. A failure that needed a bold, new, federal solution. The narrative was set. So where did this solution come from? Well, it wasn't crafted in the halls of Congress with everyone watching. No, it was done in total secrecy at a private retreat. This next chapter takes us to this little island off the coast of Georgia, a place that would become totally central to the story of modern money.
So who was in the room writing this new plan? I mean, just look at this list. You've got Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was tied to the Rockefeller family by marriage. You have Paul Warburg, repping the most powerful banking family in Europe, the Rothschilds. And of course, you've got top guys from the Morgan and Rockefeller empires. This wasn't some diverse group of thinkers. It was a tiny, concentrated group of the world's biggest financial players.
So picture this. For about 10 days, they're all huddled together, and their mission is completely secret. They were there to hammer out the blueprint for America's new central bank, a plan that would be presented to the public as a safeguard for everyone, but, would also definitely benefit their own interests.
Okay, so what did this secret plan actually look like when you put it into practice? Let's get into the mechanics. The first thing you have to realize is that most money isn't just printed by the government. It's actually created by commercial banks through a process that's known as the money multiplier effect.
It all hinges on this one idea: fractional reserve banking. I know, it sounds super complex, but the concept is actually pretty simple. A bank doesn't have to keep all the money you deposit in its vault. It only has to hold on to a tiny fraction, or a percentage of it, and the rest, well, it can lend it out.
Okay, let's trace the journey of a single deposit, because this is where it gets wild. Imagine you put $10,000 into a bank. The bank doesn't just let it sit there. It holds on to a fraction, let's say 10%, so $1,000, and it loans out the other $9,000. Now, here's where the magic happens. That $9,000 loan gets spent, and then it gets deposited into a second bank. So now your original money is in two places at once. You have a $10,000 balance, and someone else has a $9,000 balance. That second bank then does the same thing, and the cycle just keeps repeating.
So what's the end result of this repeating cycle? Well, that one single initial deposit of $10,000 allows the banking system to create, through brand new loans, around $90,000 of new money. This is the core insight from our sources. The vast majority of our money is created not as cash, but as debt, effectively out of thin air. Okay, so that explains how commercial banks create the money that we use for things like mortgages and car loans. But what about the biggest borrower of all, the government itself? Well, this is where that central bank they designed on Jekyll Island, the Federal Reserve, comes into play. In that secret plan from Jekyll Island, it was eventually pushed through Congress. But get this, the vote was held just 2 days before Christmas, at a time when most of the opposition was conveniently away for the holidays. And just like that, the Federal Reserve was born.
So how does this new Federal Reserve fund the government? Well, when the government needs to spend more money than it gets from taxes, the Treasury issues a bond, which is really just a fancy IOU. Now listen to this next step because it's the key. The Fed buys that bond, literally creating the money to do so from nothing. But it's not a gift. The government gets the cash, but now it owes the Fed the original amount plus interest. So essentially, every new dollar the government spends is born as an interest-bearing debt.
And this creates this huge difference between what we think is happening and the reality described in our sources. The common idea is, hey, the government prints money to fund things, but in this model, what the sources call a private banking cartel, creates money as debt, loans it to the government at interest, and we, the taxpayers, are ultimately the ones who have to pay it all back.
So what happens when you build an entire system on this foundation of interest-bearing debt? What are the long-term effects of this invisible machine running in the background?
Here it is. This is the central paradox of the whole system. The system creates the loan principal, right? Say $1 billion. But it never creates the extra money needed to pay the interest on that loan. So, where does that money come from? Well, the only way to get it is for the government to borrow even more, which creates a cycle that can literally never end.
The logical outcome is a machine that requires more and more debt just to keep from collapsing. In this model, it's a mathematical impossibility for the government, and by extension the public, to ever be debt-free. You always need more borrowing just to pay the interest on the debt that already exists. And according to this view, this debt machine has a direct, measurable impact on the money in your pocket. I want you to just think about one number for a second, 96%. What on earth could that represent?
That's the staggering loss of the dollar's value, its actual purchasing power, since the Federal Reserve System was created back in 1913. To put it another way, what a dollar could buy you then now costs you over $20. This continuous devaluation is seen as a direct result of constantly expanding the money supply to service all that debt.
And the sources we're looking at frame it like this. This constant inflation isn't just some random economic thing that happens, it's a direct cost of the system. As the value of your savings slowly gets eaten away, it basically functions as a stealth tax, transferring wealth away from the public and to the system itself.
So where does this all leave us? We're left with a system that, according to this analysis, requires infinite debt to function on a finite planet. And that brings us to one last, really big, unavoidable question. If a machine is designed to accelerate forever, is a final breakdown, some kind of reset, inevitable?